Okay, going live. And here we go. Welcome,
Hello.
everybody, to our panel chat on authority. Please give me just a minute here. Okay. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Ashley Phoenix. Take it over, Ashley.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Kay. Welcome everyone. We are very excited to have this conversation on authority. Um, what does it mean? How are each one of us experiencing it? I think it's going to be a very spicy conversation, but hopefully really grounded and from a space of exploration to get us to understand this word. There's so much that's happening in our not only our internal worlds but our external worlds when it comes to authority. And so I think this is a perfect time to start having this conversation. And so really quickly, I would love to kind of go around the Zoom room, so to speak, and for each one of us to say our name, maybe what magnetized us to this particular conversation, and then we'll kind of get into the question. So I would love to start with Kay.
Thank you, Ashley. I love this topic, although I think that it can be very challenging, but I feel like I've been interfacing with this topic since I was really young, and it's been sort of a a gradual exploration for me. And but now I feel like it's being like this the intersection between internal and external authority is really, ooh, it's like really potent right now. So I thought it was a good time to have that conversation. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you. Let's go. And I would love to bring Cerise on. Cerise.
Hi, Ashley. I'm Cerise Ruzich, and I when I heard about this topic, I was definitely drawn to it because authority is something I've also been working on since I was very young, and so I'm very interested in being part of the conversation and hearing from other people, but also contributing my experiences with authority. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm hearing a theme of this youth and some of this intersection that's happening. So just kind of calling that out early. Charlene.
Thank you, Ashley. My name is Charlene Santoni, and I was drawn to this conversation because actually it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. And honestly, I really feel like this is a pertinent time to figure out where true authority lies, given what we're experiencing in our world and our culture today. So yeah, I can't wait to dive in.
I cannot wait to hear what you have to say. Just knowing your area of expertise, which we'll dive into more during our conversation. And I'd love to bring Jenny in.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for bringing this very timely topic forward. And similar to Charlene, well, my name's Jenny Glick. Similarly to Charlene, um, I work with women predominantly around this idea of authority, inner authority, how we author our own lives. And I know, again, to pick up where Cerise and Kay were speaking to as a young girl myself, feeling that push up against authority and the part of me that wanted freedom and would push against authority, and then locating authority outside of myself and learning how to come back to knowing my own inner authority. That walk has been a lifetime path. So I'm thrilled to be here so that we can weave together magic.
I love that. And I love the way that you weaved in author with authority, like such an interesting way to kind of play with words, which I feel like is something that's going to really come up during this topic of when we're looking at definitions, when we're looking at what we might define in our lives as these solid pillars. In how we define things, I think there's going to be some really good conversation about that. So, I kind of want to start with the larger group, and I'm hoping we can do, I call it quantum popcorn. So I don't want to necessarily call you out, but I'm happy to do so. But this first question that I have is how do we as human beings learn about authority?
I can speak to that a little bit. I mean, in my opinion, how we learn about authority is honestly through our parents. I feel like, we are born into a family, and when we're babies, we depend on those around us for our needs to be cared for because we can't do it ourselves. And then they become an authority. And then we start learning from them and potentially take on their ideas of what authority is. But, already, right, just by being born, we're understanding maybe that there is an authority. Because when we're learning about the world, our parents are teaching us about the world and become our authority on what goes on here on planet Earth. So that's how I synthesize that question about where I think it comes from and where we start to learn about it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. When I think of authority, that was the first thing that I thought. There were sort of several pillars that showed up for me in the exploration of this word authority. First, I thought the parental unit and the sort of codependency that really exists when you're a child and you're being brought into the world and you're coming from this very curious, soft body, trying to understand the dynamics in the world and your own sort of limits in regards to how you're moving about the world. And then it kind of evolves. It's like once that pattern has been established from that family unit, then it sort of replicates itself in educational spaces, in potentially religious spaces that you might exist. And then all of a sudden it gets into larger kind of, and I know we're talking more like external authority spaces, but it kind of just tends to replicate itself in all of these other spaces that exist. I'm curious, hey, what your thoughts are on this sort of topic of where we're going with these external authority.
Yeah, I think that there, I think the parents nowadays, and certainly in future generations, they have a better understanding of the necessity of helping a child become responsible for themselves, to be their own authority. Prior to kind of this awakening, our our the authority was, like you said, it's just been passed down from our parentage. And I know from my own experience, I went to a Catholic school and there were so many authorities. There were your parents, there were the teachers, there were the sisters, there were the priests, there were the school principals, there was Jesus, there was God, there was like a whole hierarchy. And it was really there that I started to discern the difference between internal authority and external authority, because much of what they were saying, for instance, that you needed a priest in order to get to God, just didn't make sense to me. And although I've had this like relationship with authority, I was like an internal subversive. So when I started questioning these things, I started realizing that because they didn't make sense to me, they were irrelevant for me. So I wasn't like a lawbreaker or a rabble rouser, that kind of person. I'm not breaking the laws now, to the best of my knowledge, but it was kind of like this internal transformation. And I think I just, as more of those, um, situations arose where things weren't making sense to me, I can remember thinking that, like, why don't these teachers care about us? Why do I have to put money in a meter for the streets? Like the government doesn't own the streets. Like what's going on here? And why do I have to pay to go to a park? And why do I have to pay for water? And like all of these questions. And then the more questions you ask, the more you're confronted with. And so my experience with the irrelevancy of external authorities has been gradual. And but it seems like it gains momentum for me the more that the external is vying for authority over me. So that's kind of my experience with it.
Yeah, I appreciate what you shared in regards to really like understanding this sort of external authority that seems, based on what you're sharing, that when the limits were kind of approached, it actually kind of birthed or inspired this internal authority to come in through a little bit of rebellious questioning. It seems, and that the questioning was allowing you to kind of discern the difference between that external authority that's enforcing something on you versus this internal authority that is questioning and starting to maybe understand things from a different perspective. Jenny, I noticed you were shaking your head a lot while Kay was talking, and I'm just curious if there's anything that you want to contribute or affirm from this conversation.
Yes, I was really resonating with the just the number of different external authority figures that so many of us are given, and the ways spatially that those are organized, especially as we're children. So having someone on a stage or a pulpit or behind a podium, when it is that we as children or young women are connecting to our own authority, our own yes or no, and how it is that the authorities outside of us can override that as young ones, saying, no, no, you need to do this thing, you need to go to this thing, you need to participate. And how those really subtle messages that we're given, oh, it's this steady diet over time for me and my experience of denying my inner authority and then not even knowing, actually scrambling that knowing, so that I then learn that I can't trust my yes or no in here, because the people out here who have kept me safe, kept me clothed, are the authorities, have told me that those nudges of knowing are not how I should live my life. And so that the deconditioning that for some of us we've gone through over our adulthood to come back into learning how to connect up with that internal state. And I love that you called yourself out, Kay, as an internal subversive, right? And I totally relate to that. I was like on student council in high school doing all the good girl things, but then internally, like, this doesn't make any sense. Why is this happening? And so I could play both sides because I wanted to get the atta girls from the authority. I wanted to get the grades and I wanted to be in good graces. And I learned very early that if I listened to my inner questioning and voiced that I would be exiled, right? I would no longer belong in some communities.
Jenny, I love what you're sharing. There's a couple of points that you brought up that I'd like to highlight. And one is, you talked about this like pulpit, stage, microphone, whatever, and that this naturally has like almost a subliminal message that's perpetuated of this is someone that is of authority. There's so much research in psychology and sociology about you put a lab coat on someone and suddenly people are taking whatever is being shared as advice, as something that is like put in stone. So there's that piece. And then this in connection to that, where you're talking about this almost like double agent that you played, where you were both stepping onto that stage in some ways to play the part, to affirm that external authority or to get the accolades from that external authority while still continuing to have this sort of inner moral compass that is still sort of questioning. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that is still something that is present today when we're talking about politicians, when we're talking about law enforcement, when we're talking about different people that are in these sort of authority roles at the moment? Do you feel that some of them have fully stepped in, or do you think there are still some that are standing on that stage that are either not listening to that internal compass, or I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's the gamut for sure. But I can say from my own experience, I can feel how that conditioning is still so alive for me, even though I'm awake to it. So even when I encounter someone, if they have a uniform or particular credentials, there's a part of me that can defer to their knowing, to how it is that they author the world and how it is that I then can sort of allow their gravitational pull to influence my authorship of my world, and then I can question myself. And certainly sometimes that's useful. Having diverse perspectives can enhance and enrich ourselves. And I can feel even still in my 50s where that internal authority can be wobbly when, because I see someone in a man in a suit. I see a woman behind a podium with a mic, and I see her credentials. And there's a part of me that believes that they know more than I do, right? And so that's still alive for me. And yes, I think that there's the whole gamut to answer your question about how it is that people are showing up.
Mm, thank you. Cerise, I know that you mentioned earlier also this connection to authority and youth, and I'm curious, like, if there's anything that you'd like to share in regards to what you accept and what you don't accept when it comes to authority.
Yeah, I mean, it started very young, and I'm very fortunate that I had and have two very loving parents that, and they'll even say that they had to learn a lot about how to parent with me in particular because I was very strong-willed and I would question authority all the time. And so what my mom even, shared with me is she had to learn how to explain the why, and she didn't realize she had to explain the why because, when her mother told her to do something, she just did it. So she had to learn how to compromise with me, and we were able to get through my childhood and adolescent years by working together, by me understanding why the answer was no to something. And so, but what that also taught me was that it was okay to question, and so question authority. And so, and that was pervasive, from childhood to today, up until most recently. And, when Jenny's talking about, people in uniforms or on a podium, um, I try really hard to just look at them as people and not bow down to them because of their uniform or where they're standing or how tall they're standing. And it's hard to do because we've been conditioned in so many ways from the media, from society in so many different ways to just take what they say because they're wearing a uniform or a lab coat. Even, as recently as a few weeks ago, I was in the hospital with my son, and the doctor told me, to do things, and he recommended certain things. And it was foreign to everyone that I was questioning and didn't go along with his recommendations. And so, and when I, would share the story with, some people just to get some feedback, everyone's like, I can't believe that you just didn't do what they said. You have insurance. Why didn't you just do these tests? And I was like, well, there's radiation involved, and my son's young and he's sick, and to do a CAT scan with contrast, and, there were so many, factors, but because of how I was raised, and because my parents were so instrumental in letting me question and, and they worked with me, at such a young age, I felt like I had the confidence, but but it's a struggle. I was sitting there, in the hospital, and I'm like, my God, it's my son. Am I making the right decisions? I'm Googling everything as fast as I can while the doctor's talking to me and learning as much as I can in the moment. But it's definitely hard to question, because we have been raised in such a way to just to bow down or kowtow to authority. And so I finding that strength, but also I think having friends and mentors and other people who have different ideas and different perspectives also helps in having the strength and courage to question. So, for example, I'll never forget having a dinner with Charlene a while ago, where she was sharing a lot of different ideas and with me. And, just by having that conversation at that dinner, made me just, do so much research and learn about authority in different ways, and how we, again, how we've been raised and why we're doing things a certain way. So I think, so going back for me, it's, having parents that were really strong, but also, having friends in a circle of people that, with different ideas and different upbringings and different ways that they were raised, and being open-minded to hearing different perspectives and then questioning and doing research, has definitely helped me on my journey with authority.
You're bringing up a really, really interesting point, Cerise, which is something that I've been observing in kind of the collective, is this limiting actually of anyone who is out of alignment with whatever your opinion is. It's like the algorithms on social media are sort of set up in a way that you're limiting your sort of exposure to anything outside of what you deem attractive or like soothing, like anything that's affronting. It's like it sort of is tuned out. And there's a lot of encouragement really to continue to just stay in groups that align with your current ideology. So it's kind of interesting what you're saying, where there's this power in questioning, there's this power in learning and understanding things, and yet the collective is telling us, or is showing us through action and algorithm and all sorts of things, to sort of like cut off, deny, not have exposure to that. Charlene, is there anything that because I'm really curious about well, there was a specific question that I had for you, which was where does authority come from and who authorizes the authority? I was curious what your perspective was on that, but then I'm also kind of curious what your thoughts are in regards to this current collective stream of conscious of limiting different views on things.
That's a really big question. But it's well, first, I mean, I wanted to acknowledge Cerise and really just, I was just enjoying listening how you were sharing about how you've always kind of questioned. You have questioned, and it was received, and it's kind of like made you this person that you are, that is able to question, and I'll say perceived authority, right? So like in terms of where authority comes from, in my estimation, is that it's given, actually. We give things authority. Like Jenny said, I had also thought about the word author that's in the word authority, and relates to how we author our lives and what we're giving authority to. But there is a force, we'll call it, the algorithm, the who knows, every three-letter agency, like people want to claim authority, right? So it's almost like a claiming of authority. Or command authority. And some people do command authority, and they command it in a good way. But I really feel like authority is given, and authority is given through trust. And I think this is where this now conversation becomes this balance between external authority and inner authority, because usually I'm willing to give authority an external authority over me if my internal guidance or authority says that it's in alignment, which means I feel grounded, I feel clear, I feel comfortable, it's not bothering my gut, I'm not stuck in my throat. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to think that authority is actually given because, as you said, Ashley, at the beginning of the conversation, there is school, there's university, there's credentials. And we've now come to understand that maybe some credentialed, things aren't in full alignment with, they're credentialed by somebody who has a certain specific idea of what should go on, but not maybe ideally isn't the authority over someone else, like in Ceresa's example of bringing her son into the doctor. And so it's just really interesting this interplay between like given authority, perceived authorities, when truly really is authority.
Thank you. I appreciate what you said about how we give authority and we can claim or others can claim or command authority. And I kind of want to dive, we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about this external authority. I feel like our audience is very clear in regards to what we're talking about. Okay, I'm curious, how do you cultivate an internal authority? And is it connected to intuition?
Mm. Yeah, I think that the the more space that you leave open to others' input, the more it's going to rush in. Like nature loves a vacuum. Nature loves to fill a void. So I think that the more you can come into your own sense of power and rightness and ability, the more you're going to be in a position to, as Charlene mentioned, assess whether the external authority is in alignment with what you feel is right. And I also just want to speak briefly on the spectrum. I think that there are authorities who are definitely in alignment with we could say natural law or divine law. And there are others who are more aligned with man-made law, which I know Charlene can speak to this more than I can. But so for me, I have had to create this big space in my life where I'm in a place of knowing what my priorities are, what my truths are, what is right for me, what isn't right for me, and then I can choose, what I want to let in. And I also want to make the point that, this isn't anarchy. We don't need to have anarchy in order to switch over to internal authority. Like I said earlier, it's more that when you become relevant to yourself, when you become the authority in your life, the external becomes irrelevant. And then they literally do not have power over you. And I know this is a really difficult concept to grasp, but it kind of dovetails with the knowing that we are creating, our reality to a certain extent together and as individuals. So the piece about intuition is merely, it's not like a superpower. It's more like just listening to what your own guidance is telling you. It's tapping into a higher wisdom than your human self has access to. And everybody has that. There is that force for everybody. So yes, I think it's very connected. Yeah, I think it's very connected for sure.
Yeah, I agree. It was interesting what you were talking about in regards to this space, and how that can be kind of filled, it could be filled in with like outside things. But when we're talking about that, because when I think of space from an internal place, I actually think that curiosity, questioning can fill that space to kind of tune into that intuitive knowing. But I'm kind of starting to think about it, but if the space is too open, then you can sort of be filled in with like an authoritative kind of languaging. And so I'm curious, Jenny, you had kind of talked about a little bit about this questioning and like this internal compass being kind of connected a little bit to, I don't think you used the word curiosity, but I felt curiosity in your body when you were sharing. And so when we're thinking of cultivating an internal authority, what do you feel are some practices that might help to kind of stir that, so that empty space that Kay was referring to is kind of filled from that internal curiosity versus a space for external to come in and influence?
Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite questions to ask myself or to offer to women who I work with is to be with the question, what do I want to ask for that I'm afraid to ask for because I might no longer belong, right? Like most of us have something, some desire, some longing that, and that I'm not giving voice to, because if I do, I'll be seen as too much, too demanding. They won't like me. I'll be exiled, whatever it might be. And so, what is it that I want to ask that I'm afraid to ask of this person who I'm working with, maybe a physician, Cerise, in your situation, or whomever that authority might be in our life, or even a friend that is not an authority over us, but that we've maybe given a little bit of authority to because we're not accessing whatever that inner authority is. So that's a question that can be helpful, I think, in terms of guiding. And then the other piece in terms of curiosity, I'm such a student of the body. And so noticing what is happening, like Charlene mentioned, like a tight belly or a clenched throat, like these cues of, and the cues don't necessarily mean one shouldn't do whatever the thing is, but to bring witness to what's happening in the body, what's kind of rolling through this physical body, when it is that we're making these very simple decisions throughout our life. I had a conversation with a neighbor this morning, and in the conversation, I could feel where I was silencing my authority, and I could feel it because I felt my cheeks getting hot. I felt myself being clipped in my speech, like just wanting to like move on with the conversation. I felt myself maybe creating a bit of a protective shell around myself so that I didn't have an opening that would be infiltrated, right? And it was such an internal experience to witness myself feeling sort of wrong, like just this really interesting mixture of, oh, there's a difference here, and I don't know that there's space for my difference, and that swirling that can happen as we were sort of discussing external authority. How is it that we live with external authority? So I think maintaining curiosity with your body, noticing what it is that you want, that you might be afraid to ask, that we can't give voice to, and that often points to a desire or a longing that has not been tended to.
I love what you shared, and just kind of staying on this, like, how do we cultivate this internal authority? I really felt you highlight, like the emotional intelligence that exists within our physical being, the mental intelligence that exists, and then this physical intelligence that happens. And what would you recommend for someone that is in that experience, like, of things to consider? So if you are, we're talking about how society is kind of bringing us into a space where we're kind of gathering with like-minded individuals and are not necessarily opening ourselves up to differing perspectives of the world. And so, if you are someone that's just starting to question this external authority and starting to kind of tune into this internal authority, and then you're exposed to maybe like a harsh lens on the world that you're not quite sure, like what would you recommend for someone that's still in that space of learning how to navigate, opposing perspectives of the world, I guess?
Sure. I think the first thing is that practice of really grounding oneself in oneself. So it's easy to feel often in our bodies when we lose connection with ourselves, we won't feel our feet and our energy starts going up, up, up to our heads. And then since we're mammals, our eyebrows do this thing where it's like I'm fully in my head and I'm fully in like lion tiger mode where I'm like going to attack or defend. So our bodies give us so many tells that when energy starts going up and I'm up here, living from here up, then I've disconnected, dissociated from this because there's not an integration. I mean, it's not bad. We all do it. I did it a little bit this morning, so that happens in our body. So the first thing is in that moment to recognize for yourself, oh, I'm having this experience of disconnecting from my body and wanting to go up here where it feels safe, where I can make an argument or help you understand me so that you still like me or whatever the thing is. So have so much compassion with yourself, breathe, come into your body. And I'm a huge fan of like full disclosure with people. And so even in a social, conversation with someone to say, you know what, I hear what you're saying. And as I'm listening, I can feel my heart is racing, my mouth is getting dry, my feet feel a little numb. And those are cues to me that I am going to take 5 minutes or come back to this conversation later. Like I would love to have this conversation with you, but I can feel my body having a response to what's going on. And I just want to name it here. Right. And so depending on the level of intimacy that you have with that person, presencing, making it okay, like socially okay for us to have bodies. It's like, oh, nothing to see here. Let me just sit through this conversation and be a mouth speaking when actually my whole body is having this experience that if I were to speak it, we could, and I'm having the experience of a hot flash right now, which you can see on my face. That's my experience. If we just name the thing, then we can presence our bodies, right? And have some relaxation around that.
Yeah, I really love that because I feel like when you talk about that experience in the body and you're sharing that kind of reaction that's happening, it brings humanity back into the conversation when there is an external authority that is kind of impeding upon your center, your balance, your intuition, your own internal authority. And I feel like those suggestions that you're making are really kind of advocating for the internal authority to still stay present, even when there's this experience that's sort of happening in the body. Now, Charlene, I know I was very excited to hear you talk about the subject. And one of the things that Kay had mentioned was sort of this natural law versus man-made law. And I know that you could probably do like a 2-week conference on those subject matters as the expert that you are, but I'm just curious, are there any key highlights that you would like to mention in regards to these things and cultivating an internal authority?
Well, before we dive into the distinction between divine law versus man-made law, I kind of want to build on what Jenny just shared because I love it so much, but also from my own personal experience of feeling like I was rubbing up against someone else's authority or what they gave authority to, is that I really had to be with myself in a different way. Maybe not like clearly my body will have those kinds of signals that Jenny is speaking to, but what it's interpreted for me as a threat, and I really feel like, there's also a culture that's been cultivated around like, if we don't think the same thing, you're a threat to me. And so I just unhinged that right away. Like just unhinged the idea that somebody who has a different idea or is given a different authority to something or someone or some that it really isn't a threat. And even if I think it's a threat, I mean, honestly, this went down, years ago when there was this idea that I could be forced to get a medical intervention I wasn't interested in, and it felt made me feel threatened. So that's when I started to cultivate this like idea of like, is it a threat? It could be a threat. It feels like it's a threat. It's not a threat. And when I come up against people and their ideas, I just keep reminding myself because in truth, it is not a threat. In truth. And if I just keep reminding myself that, then it keeps revealing to me. And that to me would be a divine law. So in the man-made world, we'll call it that, which some people also refer to as the matrix, it will have you think that there is one authority, there's limited resources, there's only one way to do something, and there's all kinds of authority put upon humans that ideally, they try to make us believe that's the way. And there's plenty of man-made law that aligns with divine law. But when man-made law begins to request that somebody go against divine law, which comes straight from the source, and like the very basic divine law is do no harm, that's when it's really easy to unhinge man-made authority from like a greater or divine authority or divine law. The three, like even common law, which is what the Constitution is based on, which we will not talk about here because we're not even operating on the Constitution, which is man-made law, is do no harm to anyone, their rights, or their property. So in the worlds that I dance in, ideally it would be like if everyone could agree to those three things, we'd be humming along. But so that's really and the other thing that I say too about divine law, because it's not talked about, and we're facing some of these things that certain authorities will want to make you think that there's not enough water, there's too much of something else, and divine law is comes from the source of all life, unlimited potential, unlimited resources, and it's infinite. Whereas in the man-made world, things are very finite, and operate within a certain limited bounds. And then for me, it goes back to authorship. Which do you want to give authority to? Do you want to be in a man-made limited arena, or do you want to dance in like the unlimited potential of divine law? I hope that answers it in a good way.
Yes. And definitely a mic drop moment. But I'm curious about, it's super interesting because you're talking about how, in this sort of man-made space, we're talking about limited sources. And I think I don't know where I'm going with this, so bear with me, but I'm just thinking about internal authority. And then I'm thinking about when external authority is telling you things are limited, scarcity, fear, like some of these other things that come up, it feels to me like there's both a push and pull with innovation, because there's this drive for innovative solutions for this scarcity fear that are, and yet that requires an internal authority to question, to push into that innovation. So it almost feels like even in this external authority space, it feels like there's a conversation to be had about, and yet that external authority is willing to utilize our natural desire, our natural inclination for creativity and innovation, but to use it for their own kind of power source versus this internal knowing where the innovation and the creativity is really coming from this limitless abundant space. I'm curious what your if you have any thoughts on that, Charlene, and then I want to come to Cerise.
Um, I don't, yeah, that is a great question. I feel like it's a both and because
Mm,
I know that in this existence that we live in, that friction, creativity happens, the spark happens with friction, right? Like the innovation that you're talking about, or rubbing a rock on another rock, the spark happens and the fire um goes. And so yeah, I don't have any real other answers other than I feel like it's brings into this much deeper conversation because I do feel like that there is a journey to be had with an external authority to bring somebody fully into their internal authority. So that's what stirs in me when you bring that up.
interesting. Cerise, that kind of comes back to what you were sharing earlier in the call in regards to this questioning. I feel like, we've talked about this friction, this space where you're bumping up, the internal authority within you is bumping up against the external. We've talked about this physical, emotional. How do you think kind of questioning interplays in this space of friction? Does it?
I mean, I think you have to see what you're comfortable with. I think, some people are comfortable with questioning, some people aren't comfortable. Um, some people are in tune with their body. I mean, I was listening to what Jenny was sharing, and when I listened to Jenny, I said, wow, she's very in tune with her body and the signals her body's sending her. I don't know how many people are that comfortable and understanding of their body to recognize when things are rising, when they have to say, I need to step away. Because I don't think we're really taught that anywhere. And so, you know, um, I remember for me, one of the first experiences with actually listening to my body was doing Vipassana, sitting a 12-day silent meditation and 12 hours a day meditating and focusing on the sensations in the body. And, you know, but not everyone can do that or has that opportunity. Not, that's not something that's being taught. So I think it's something, so questioning authority, questioning your inner, authority, understanding those feelings in your body. I think that emotional intelligence that you also referenced, Ashley, a lot of these things aren't taught. So I think the masses, at least this is my opinion, I don't think the masses, are very comfortable in that space. Um, I think that's why I think that's why, yoga and meditation and things are becoming more and more popular because I think people are recognizing the importance of, you know, learning that, and listening to their bodies and getting those signals and listening to that inner authority and knowing. So I think there is a shift happening for sure, but I don't think it's the standard or norm yet. And hopeful, optimistic that, we're trending in that direction. And that, there are people like Jenny who offer services, to help work with people to learn and to mentor people into, their to doing that and understanding and listening to the bodies and having those conversations. But I think it again goes back to uh, being comfortable having difficult conversations with people and being open to hearing those different perspectives and going against some of the things that you might be hearing in the news, on TV, et cetera. And you mentioned things that are going on and such. And I think it's a matter of stepping out of people's comfort zones and really being open-minded to different perspectives, diversity of ideas, not, getting out of this, shared collective thinking, and talking to other people, getting different um, ideas and thoughts and being open to learning. I mean, I consider myself a student of life and continuously learning and growing. And and I'm like I said, dinner with Charlene, learn a lot. Conversations with Kay, I learn every day. Conversations with you, Ashley, like just and Jenny. I mean, I think there's so people have different perspectives, different ideas, and just being open to them and listening, I think is really, really helpful. But yeah.
Thank you. Kay, I'm curious what your thoughts have been about the different directions that we've gone in regards to law, internal authority. We talked about innovation. Like, is there anything that you would like to kind of contribute?
I have so many thoughts. One of the things that I was thinking about when Jenny was speaking about her body's reaction to a conversation, I have like a similar feeling when I'm in a conversation. And for me, it's usually like those feelings are usually a signal that my ego has been activated. And that, as Charlene spoke to, I'm feeling like I'm in some kind of dangerous situation. So in those moments, I remind myself to, soften, open my heart, be open to the other person's experience. And that's really what I want to say is that these things are not mutually exclusive. Like I can be in my internal authority and you can be in whatever experience you're having, and they can coexist in a peaceful way, no problem. And I just feel that the more softness we can bring to our hearts, and the less attachment to our ideas, which is something that I'm constantly working on because I have some strong ideas, but I don't want to be attached to them because I want to remain open to what I don't know. How else are you going to learn and grow? So that's kind of where what my position is on it is I welcome the conversation even when it makes me uncomfortable, and I'm gonna soften my heart to whatever comes forward. So. You're on mute, Ashley.
I love what you're sharing. It really sounds like a really powerful pearl of wisdom. And so we are close to the top of the hour. And I would love, just as a kind of a closing of our conversation together, I'd love to kind of go around our virtual space. And I'm just curious for individuals that might be listening to this that are wanting to either question, like find a space in which they can question external authority, or if you have advice on how to kind of cultivate more internal authority, what is one piece of advice that you might give in either direction? And I'll start with Charlene.
Oh, thanks, Ashley. And for picking me first. Um, Gosh, in terms of cultivating more inner authority, is that's what the question is? Is gosh, honestly, for me, it's just come down to believing myself. Um, just really accepting and believing myself, and then not being afraid to ask questions. Pretty much. Thank you.
Thank you. Cerise.
Um, I'm going to give a recommendation of a book that definitely touched my spirit, and that was Women Who Run with Wolves. Because I think that really talks to transformation and strength. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Jenny.
So for me, the foundation internally is safety. And so recognizing or becoming aware of how it is that one might unconsciously be creating unsafety inside through how we think, feel, believe, and do inside. I was speaking with a client of mine earlier today who was sharing about the internal voice that she has, that, you know, she is should be ashamed for what she did and she can't trust herself. And so that internal dialogue makes it really hard to locate internal authority inside, and for a human to be able to trust themselves. So then it's very easy to farm that authority out. And so just growing awareness as to how it is that you think, feel, do, and believe in the world. And if that contributes to a sense of safety, exhale inside. And if it doesn't, then there are lots of ways that one can shift that for themselves.
Thank you, Jenny. Kay.
Thank you, Ashley. What I want to share is that the space in your mind, in your heart, in your body, in your being is sacred. And you should determine who has access to that. And you should be discerning, and you should be, just block out as much as you can anything that does not make you feel, like Jenny said, safe, good, secure, and good, sacred.
Thank you. Ooh, some really, really good suggestions and recommendations from this group.
Can I interject a second, Ashley? Oh, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, what about you? What are your...
Thank you. For me, it actually aligns with a lot of what has been shared. I tend to pay attention to my body first, because we're here having these very, very human experiences. Like our bodies are so strange and wonderful that I sometimes will get curious about my physical body. And I've found that for me, when I've gotten curious about my own body, it's led me to healing resources, whether it's cognitive therapy, whether it's a movement practice, or meditation, or whatever it is. But I find that when I get curious about what's happening in my body, the stuckness that I can often feel, it's led me to kind of tools that have helped me to kind of cultivate an internal authority. So it's a curious thing that it's the body that's inspiring me to find safe places, I would say, to explore the musculature of like developing an internal authority. And so it's not that I'm going to individuals because they're an expert and they know more than me, but they just happen to have a gift or a skill set that I'm curious about. And so it's the curiosity that kind of guides me into cultivating internal authority. But I've always found it tends to come from a contraction of some sort. So I'm always like, where am I gripping that I need to actually start to relax? And it takes time for the body to eventually let that grip relax into a hand open space. And so that's my suggestion, is to really like tune into where you're holding, and then start to see what kind of things you might be able to work with that could open that up. I think talk therapy is a beautiful gift for those that are really operating from that external authority place, because it can provide safety to allow for questioning to happen. So, well, that concludes our time together. Thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation. I will turn it over to you, Kay.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. Your expertise is so precious to me. And thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye, everybody.